When I worked at an inn in New Hope, Pennsylvania, as a live-in housekeeper, I always knew exactly how many guests we had at the house. I always took time out to talk to each guest, trying to remember who they were and their names for the next morning when I served breakfast. That night I knew we only had one room left unoccupied, and I always felt relieved to have even one less room to clean in the 8-room inn. I knew that all of the guests were in their rooms one night, and I looked down the hall to see a man in coattails look up the long stairway to the upstairs of the old house. I thought that he looked upset because he's bolted upstairs, 2 steps at a time. I remember thinking at the time that the manager or the innkeeper may have checked this last guest in, and he was possibly part of a wedding. I told the manager the next day that I wasn't looking forward to cleaning all the rooms. He said, "What are you talking about? You don't have to clean all the rooms. Only 7 were rented." He said in a voice that I can only describe as annoyed. Confused, I asked him who the man in the gray coat was that bolted upstairs last night. Was he one of their friends? He wasn't any of the guests that I had checked in. I knew that for sure. When I told the manager about the gray-coated man, he looked at me like he had seen a ghost. The manager said, "Don't tell me that. I don't want to hear any more about this." Still confused, I said, "What do you mean he wasn't a guest?" He said, "Oh no, it's Ann Miller, the movie star, all over again. She stayed here and started talking like this." Apparently others had seen this ghost before, and there was an old newspaper story on the wall about a ghostly soldier staying at the end, or something like that. I'm just really, really glad that I didn't realize that the ghost was a ghost, or I wouldn't have been able to sleep that night in my room on the top floor. I had also nights in the inn where I was sure somebody was watching me, standing right over me. I used to hear very loud, almost insanely loud ringing sounds in my ears at the time. I remember thinking how cruel that was, that loud ringing sound, and I wondered if I was going to die. The energy was very, very strong. I was also uncomfortable after that, and couldn't stand to have the vacuum cleaner on, because I felt cut off from the real world when I was in the inn by myself. Evening Magazine did a story when I was still working there too, about the best inn in New Hope. As you may have guessed, yes, they did mention that ghost in the story. Me and a couple of my other friends were at a slumber party at my friend's house. All of a sudden, my friend starts talking about these people that went into the cemetery and never came out. So I automatically yell out, "Let's go check it out." So we did. We didn't go in the cemetery, but we saw some really freaky things, and I think you deserve to know what we saw. At first, I did not believe her, but then I saw this strange figure sitting on a pole on top of the fence. So I'm like, "You guys see that silver pole?" And they said, "Yeah." Then I said, "Look up." We all saw it. It was a faint sight of a woman, her head facing downward at first. Then she looked up. I screamed. We all did. Then we ran inside the house. After we were calm enough to talk, we started dancing around to the music. When we had come in, we closed the shades. But then something strange started happening. The blinds started to sway back and forth, faster and faster each time. By then, we were so scared we jumped on the couch, but none of us had the guts to get up to turn the television off. But another strange thing started happening. The TV started turning on and off and changing channels slowly. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. We were tired and freaked out, but me and one of my friends were still up. So we look out the window. We didn't get up, but sure enough, we looked out a crack in the window and saw a ghost looking straight at us. We screamed and woke the other girls up. They saw it too. We went up to wake my friend's parents up to show them, but when they got downstairs, the ghost was gone. I've always been a Stephen King fan, and have always wanted to visit the hotel that inspired The Shining. I got to do just that in September. We checked in, went to our room, turned on the light, left our bags, and turned the light off. We came back an hour later and could only turn the light on with a chain on the ceiling fan, not the light switch. Later, after we went to sleep, the bed shook, like it feels when your washer is in spin mode. We found out at the tour that this is Billy, a mischievous boy. Then we heard the hotel ghost children, described the next day in the tour, giggling and running up and down the hall outside our room of 416. Nobody was even outside the door. I got to meet the people staying in 217, Stephen King's room in the presidential suite, and while we were in the room, we all started smelling a strong scent of rosewater. The tour guide said that was Miss Stanley. We ate in the restaurant downstairs, and my wife's phone went to vibrate mode all on its own. I also set up my Sansa brand digital sound recorder in our room and got the children running not once, but twice, as well as the sounds of chairs sliding across the floor and dresser drawers opening and closing, although we were asleep and didn't see it happen. While taking photos, my camera would zoom by itself and sometimes shut off. I don't give a rat's butt if anyone on this website or my friends ever believe me. I will be staying there again. I have business meetings in Loveland every 6 months. What a great time. My daughter had just passed away. She was only 31 years old. She had a grand mal seizure, so it was sudden. After the funeral, I took some of the cut flowers and used twine to hold them together. I then hung them from a pipe in the basement to let them dry. A few days later, I was in the basement doing laundry when I got a really uneasy feeling, and it was getting worse. It got so bad that I started to feel that someone was in the room with me, but I was also too scared to turn around and look. I then turned to my right as slow as I could to walk towards the stairs. I never moved my head. Like I said, I was scared to death. I knew someone was there. I started up the stairs very slowly. I was afraid if I moved too fast, it would hurt, grab, touch, or do something to me. When I got to the top and turned the corner, the feeling left. But after about 5 seconds later, there was a horrible crash that came from the basement. I had a wall of shelves holding canning jars, glassware, knickknacks, etc. It sounded as if this whole wall just fell down. The noise was horrible. That was it. I packed a few things and got the hell out of there and went to a friend's house. After 4 days, I went back with my friend. We waited a little while because we were both apprehensive. But then we went into the basement. I expected to see a disaster on the floor, but there wasn't. To my amazement, the only thing on the floor were my daughter's funeral flowers. Fluffy, dried up flowers that couldn't have been heard falling if you stood right next to it. I also know that it would have been impossible for them to just fall because of the way I tied them up there. I've been trying to contact people who know about this stuff, but hit a dead end because they all want money to answer my questions about this. When a close person dies, it's natural that you would feel and hope that if possible, they will send you a sign. In this case, I don't think this event was my daughter's doing. She would not have scared me like that. That presence was one of evil. It felt evil. If I never was a believer before, I was on that day. I was 15 years old and was home from Arizona for the summer. I more or less grew up on our family farm. The house there is an older style 2-story farmhouse. I play guitar and like to play in the stairwell because the acoustics sound good there. It was early one afternoon in the month of June, and I was taking some time to play, sitting on the middle landing. It was a warm day out. As I was playing, I had noticed the air leading upstairs had gotten cooler. It was weird. Appearing from the north bedroom was an apparition of an older woman with short dark hair, wearing an older style dress, apron, glasses, and holding a rag. She had no feet, but moved to the south bedroom across the hall. Then she came back and looked at me and smiled. She then went back to the south bedroom, The air by this time was noticeably cooler. My first reaction was to get out of there, but I really did not feel scared. I talked to my father a few days later about it, and that was when I found out my then grandmother was not my real grandmother, but my grandfather's second wife. My father told me his real mother died from a fall down those stairs, resulting in a blood clot to her brain. My father was 14 years old when she died. Her funeral was also in the house. She was a lover of music, as all her children played from one form of instrument or other. I, of course, had never seen her. My father just stared at me when I described her to him. Then he took me to visit my grandfather, and I was shown a picture of her. That was her. For some reason, when I go back to the house, I still feel a presence there. I can remember my first experience with a spirit, and it frightened me to the point where I was almost petrified to get out of bed. Okay, let me back up. I was quite a few years younger, probably 8 or 9, when the usual bedtime routines would begin. My younger brother, age 4 at the time, was making his commonly nightly advance for the light switch on the wall. He'd always switch it on right before bed, because he was afraid of the dark, to a point where he would scream like the uncanny themselves. The light switch was at the top of the stairs, in our room, and to scan down the stairs without the lights on, you were almost never able to see the bottom. I believe there was at least 18 stairs, and at the very bottom, another light switch. Above the switches were the light fixtures themselves, just 2 tiny fixtures lighting a long staircase, which would leak beams of light right into the bedroom and keep it well lit. The night continued like any other. Our parents tucked us into our beds, gave us each a kiss on the forehead, told us they loved us, and we'd sleep content knowing they were there. No more than an hour or 2 passed and the light bulbs went out, one after the other. I thought nothing of it until my brother began to toss and turn in his bed as if he were very ill. He sat up in his bed and buried his head into his hands, looked up, and cried for our parents to fix it. Some time ticked by. It turned out the light bulbs blew, which I also thought nothing of until I realized the next morning that we just put new bulbs in that afternoon. After the small, bothersome fiasco, I finally managed to get back to sleep. Many hours later, I regained consciousness, keeping my eyes closed, hoping to get back to sleep. No lights on, which meant nothing would burn my eyes, and I thought I'd be back out in seconds, until I was disturbed by a long, chilling wind that swept up from the flooring. Immediately, I realized I had the chills and opened my eyes, seeing nothing more than a long, flowing, white fabric float over my entire body. Almost too afraid to move, I slowly jerked my head to look at the staircase, seeing how it was almost perfectly adjacent to the foot of my bed. I saw a woman. She seemed so peaceful, content, without a care. Standing at the top of the stairs, she reached for the handrail and dropped her right foot down 1 step. At this time, I realized there was something amiss with her beautiful, fluttering, chestnut brown hair. I was curious as to how her hair was flowing, as if in the wind, when she caught me glancing at her. She seemed so startled and afraid to see me, as if she did something terribly wrong. She began to become transparent as her head hung lower in shame and came back up in a gasp, as if she meant to say something or became even more frightened, and then she was gone. The breeze that filled my room as this event transpired died down, and my alarm clock read 3 a.m. My husband and 2 children moved into a house that we had rented while we were waiting for our new house to be finished so we could move in. We had only been in a rental a few days when strange things started to happen. My husband worked long hours and wasn't home much, so my children and I spent many nights alone. At first, I dismissed what I was feeling was nerves for being alone in a new house and not knowing any of the neighbors. I would be startled awake in the middle of the night with the feeling that I was being watched and someone was trying to get my attention. I would sit up in my bed, and there was a dark figure standing in the doorway of my bedroom. Like I said at first, I dismissed it as my imagination. However, the events continued to take place on a nightly basis. Then my 4-year-old son started to talk about the monkeys that were counting his fingers when he was in his room. I asked him to tell me what the monkeys looked like, and he described a dark figure that I had been seeing. At this time, I was getting a little spooked. It really got to me, and I realized that I was dealing with a spirit when one of my kids' wound up stuffed animals kept laying in the middle of the kitchen floor, and I would pick it up and put it in the toy room, and within minutes the toy would be in the middle of my kitchen floor again. Finally, I gave up and put the toy on top of the fridge to keep the toy away from the kids. We left shortly after placing the toy up out of the reach of my children. We were gone for most of the day. When I walked into the house from being gone for the day, the toy was in the middle of my kitchen floor, playing the song it plays when it has been wound up. This made the hair on my back of my neck stand up. Later that same week, I had the kids in bed asleep, and I was laying on the couch watching TV. Everything seemed at peace for the time being, when all of a sudden, it sounded like someone was beating up the freestanding fireplace with a baseball bat. I ran for the kids' room to make sure they were safe. When I reached the hallway, I went through one of the spirits. It was a cold that cannot be described. It went all the way through me, and it's a feeling that I will never forget. When I got to my kids' room, I saw that the children were fine and sleeping like babies. I went into the living room and started yelling at whomever it was, and I told them that they are welcome to stay in the home if they would quit scaring us. I said if they let us be, we promised that we would move out as soon as possible. The events calmed down quite a bit. However, they let their presence known on a daily basis. The monkeys continued to count my son's fingers, and I would be startled nightly with a dark shadow standing in my bedroom doorway. We moved out about a month later, and my son stopped telling me about the monkeys. My son is now 20 years old, and he still remembers the monkeys and brings the subject up from time to time. I would like to share with you one of my own true experiences, which happened right here in Dayton, Tennessee, approximately 20 years ago. This story is true. I don't have a witness and I can't prove it, but it happened. When I was about 25 years old, I was hired on at the city of Dayton as a laborer. Due to medical problems, I requested a transfer and wound up working at the water plant. This is where water is sucked in through huge pipes from the Tennessee River and treated with chemicals to make it safe for drinking. Since it had to be located near the river, the water plant was rather secluded and far away from any houses. It was a lonesome place on the graveyard shift, from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. Nobody there but me and sometimes my little dog, Rustus. But it wasn't really scary either. It was spotlessly clean and well lit. There were no cobwebs or dark corners, and best of all, it was easy. The only place in the plant that made me nervous was the basement. That's where the huge pipes from the river entered into the building, and the atmosphere down there was just creepy. Anyway, I've always been sensitive to spirits, somewhat psychic, and I know my way around a deck of tarot cards, and that intuitive voice, that gut feeling, told me that I should stay on the upper floors, at least above ground level. So I did, and everything was cool for a long time, but then, things changed. I went into work that night at 11, same as usual. Nothing out of the ordinary was going on, and after saying goodnight to the guy that worked the evening shift, I started the filters, checked all the chemicals, and then settled into the chair behind the desk in the office with a book. It's kind of strange, the little things that we remember. The name of the book was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. Why do I remember that? Oh, well, that's not important. I was really getting into the story. You know how sometimes you can get so absorbed into something like that? You forget about everything except the book, and the next thing you know, a couple of hours have slipped away without a whisper. Well, that's what happened. I looked at the clock and it was 3 a.m., straight up. The true witching hour. That's exactly when I heard the noises began. Slam. Something in the hall had fallen onto the tiled floor. Bang. It happened again. But that wasn't possible. I was alone, and there was nothing in the hall that wasn't bolted to the floor. So I took a deep breath, slowly eased out of my chair, and peeked through the doorless opening into the hall. First to the left I looked. Nothing. Just the closet door, which was open slightly. Then to the right, and there, about halfway to the door that led down to the basement, were 2 of the cabinet doors laying flat out on the floor. The same 2 cabinet doors that I had carefully closed and latched earlier. I decided that they weren't hurting anything by being there instead of on the cabinet, at least until the sun came up. I reasoned would be okay, and I could just stay in the office in case the phone rang or anything. I turned back to my chair and book and wished that there was a door that I could close and lock. But there was no door. It had been removed years earlier by Charles, an enterprising ex-employee who would never tell where he hid that door after he got fired for trying to disassemble the whole building in 8 hours. When questioned by the supervisor, Charles pulled a knife and began to babble about the Bible, the Great Beast, and the Book of Revelations. But back to it, my chair and book. I sat back down and tried to read more, but it was impossible. You see, I began to feel that I wasn't alone. I knew that there was someone else in the building, in the basement to be precise, and I knew that it was not friendly. So I just sat there behind the desk, looking through the doorway, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. I felt it before I saw it. A terrible air of hatred and evil seemed to settle in like fog in a graveyard. I was scared, really scared. And then I saw it. As I sat in the chair, looking out into the hallway, the shape drifted into view. It came from the direction of the basement, floating slowly about 6 to 12 inches above the floor. It was the shape of a man, solid, but at the same time not solid, and it was totally black, like a human body dipped in tar. I saw the arms, the legs, the head, but no face and no eyes. When it was exactly in the center of the open doorway, it seemed to notice me for the first time. It turned in my direction, and when we were face to face, with no more than 8 feet of open space and one small desk between us, it almost killed me. It very nearly scared me to death. It began to scream and reach for me, but for some reason, it seemed that it could not cross the threshold from the hall. So it reached and reached, and the arms started to get longer, getting closer with every effort, but never quite touching me. The monster leaned inward through the door and screamed its frustration. Now let me explain that it never made a sound that I could actually hear. It had no mouth. When I say screamed, I mean that it sent wave after wave of negative energy towards me and through me. Hate and fear of such intensity that I had never felt before and never want to feel again pulsed through my body with every lunge of that black demon. I truly thought that I was going to die from the fear, but I didn't want to die in the presence of such a creature. So I sat there for the duration of the attack, at least 30 seconds. I know that 30 seconds is not usually thought to be a very long time, but in my situation, it seemed to be considerably longer. Finally, after my half-minute of terror was up, the thing turned its head to its left, as if it heard something. It then looked eyelessly back at me for just a moment, then turned away and floated back towards the basement. It was several seconds before I could breathe again. When I regained my senses, I was in a fetal position in the chair, with my legs in front of me for protection. Only my bugged-out eyes were above my knees as I watched for any reappearance of the spirit, but thankfully, it did not return. As soon as I was able to speak again, I was on the telephone, calling everybody, anybody. I didn't care who, just to hear a human voice. I finished my shift that night, and I didn't say anything to the day shift guy when he got there at 7 a.m. I immediately applied for a transfer back to the chain gang and soon received it. I never went back to the water plant. I now know the reason that Charles lost his mind. He thought his religion would protect him, but somehow the evil got through. And I know why the people that work there now, 20 years later, carry handguns at all times. They're scared, but they don't know what is scaring them. And you and I both know that if a monster ever returns, their bullets will not protect them. I still don't know what protected me, but I'm glad that it did. In the 20 years since this happened, I've done a little research and talked to several psychics, and I've learned that other people have seen these black spirits in various places and that they are indeed dangerous. So, if you ever go out ghost hunting, and I still do, watch yourself. These spirits are real, and they are nothing to play with. Hey guys, thank you so much again. I'm just chilling with my cat here, Mr. Whiskers. Just kidding, his name is not Mr. Whiskers. But you wish it was, because a name like that is just so cute. You can't ignore it. Anyway, I'm just gonna shut up right now, because I love talking shit to myself. And if I don't stop right now, this could get really ugly. So please, for the love of God, share, comment, and like my stuff. Let me know what you feel about these videos, and what you feel about this particular video. No, but seriously, I know I made it sound atmospheric by reading this like it was a story, but please go ahead and comment, like, and subscribe. Just one share, just one comment, and just one like honestly can go a long way into supporting my channel so that it gets out to everybody that it needs to. So just keep that in mind, and remember, I always love you guys, and I'm signing off. So good night, good morning, whatever your day may be at the moment.